So we are the pre-diagnosis genetic ALS and FTD community. We are re-presenting for you today our presentation that was given to the FDA on January 12th. Before we get started with the main presentation, which is a redo of what we did for the FDA, I just wanted to share some basic info that we have for folks. So how did we get here? So our team of people has been organizing for the last few years. We met on social media, on Facebook, if you can believe it. And we organized ourselves into a volunteer team. And over that time, we started to make connections with other adult onset neurological conditions, including some wonderful Huntington's disease activists. And as we connected, especially with two rock star Huntington's disease activists, Seth Rotberg and BJ Vow, we heard from them how they were planning on doing an FDA patient listening session for the pre-diagnosis Huntington's disease community. And we thought, wow, what a great idea. So we heard with great interest how their patient listening session went. And through hard work of many, many folks, we got ready to get our patient listening session going. A little bit of other information to share with you is the FDA made clear to us, the patient affairs team that handles these listening sessions, that when they were sending the calendar invite to the FDA staff that were attending the meeting, they would include any information or links that we would like to share with them. And so just briefly, just to give you a flavor of some of the things we attached to them, I have that here on this slide. So first up, we shared two posters that our team has done. One was published in the journal ALS and Frontal Temporal Dementia as an abstract from the 2022 ALS M&D Symposium, where I estimated the size of the pre-symptomatic C9orf72 population in the US at about 140,000 people. And our poster that we presented at the ALS M&D Allied Professionals Forum in December about the desire for pre-symptomatic treatment in the at-risk community, which we do touch on later in this presentation. We also included three papers. The literature on pre-diagnosis genetic ALS and FTD is voluminous. There's a lot out there, but I included three papers that I thought would just give a good flavor to the FDA about what we were going to talk about. And those were the mild motor impairment, prodromal state that Dr. Benatar published last year on pre-symptomatic prodromal ALS. A very recent paper from Genfi about the brain changes that are seen in C9 FTD, C9 GRN, and MAPT carriers in their late teens and early 20s. That show the diseases are active for quite some time before there's any diagnosis made. And then finally, a wonderful paper done by the lab of the Valbas. If you don't know them, that's Eric and Sonia Valbal. I'm probably saying their name wrong, but I know them online. They're part of our network of adult onset neurological inherited conditions. And Sonia is at risk for familial fatal prion disease and is a scientist at the Broad Institute studying that with her husband, Eric. And they published a paper this year called Disease Stages and Therapeutic Hypotheses in 2 Decades of Neurodegenerative Disease Clinical Trials. And in it, they looked at all of the interventional trials in Alzheimer's, in ALS, in FTD, and they looked at, okay, all these trials over the last 20 years, how many were conducted early in the disease course, which everyone knows that the best time to treat a neurodegenerative disease is early in the disease. So with this knowledge that humanity has that neurodegeneration is best stopped early, how many interventional trials have been conducted in that disease stage? And the result, of course, was that very few have been done early in the disease process. So there's something wrong. There's something not happening properly in the system. If we all know the best time to treat these diseases is early, and yet over 20 years, very rarely is anyone trying to see what these drugs do early. So here we're going to get started with our actual presentation to the FDA. Of course, we started out by thanking them for having us, thanking the patient affairs team for getting us there. So just to start by way of introduction, so we are the genetic ALS and FTD community organized as the End the Legacy group. I'm Jean Swidler. I'm the chair of the group, and I'm a C9orf72 carrier. On this slide, you can see in the upper right corner a photo of me with my mother, who died of ALS in 2019, 16 months after she was diagnosed with ALS. Below her, you can see a photo of my grandmother, Lillian, a few months before she died in December 1990. To the left is just a simple representation of the risk in my family. So at the, these are all the descendants of my grandmother. At the top is my mom, who in red, who died in 2019. And there's also my aunt, who was diagnosed at the age of 58 in 2019 as well. She's still living with advanced ALS. Below that, my mother and aunt's siblings, plus me and my siblings, plus my aunt's children, are 11 people with a 50-50 risk. Below that are children of my aunts and uncles who do not yet have ALS. So those folks in yellow, there's 14 of them with a 25% chance of having the mutation. And below that, children of, the grandchildren of my aunts and uncles who do not yet have disease and have not yet tested, who have a 12.5% chance of having the mutation. A quick word on my mom and what she experienced. So my mom knew that her mother and her grandfather had died of ALS, and she had intense anxiety about developing ALS. And what did she do with that information? Well, she went to the medical field with it, with that concern. She went to her primary care physician for many years and would always bring up that she was worried about developing ALS. And her primary care physician, who was a very sweet man, I believe my father still sees him as a primary care physician. He presumably looked into it and saw that, well, there's nothing to do for genetic ALS before you get diagnosed. So he did nothing for her. No one said there was anything to do, and he had nothing to offer her. So she just had to sit with that risk and with that fear. And then she started getting quite obvious symptoms. She developed drop feet in both of her feet. She had a positive Babinski reflex. Her big toe kept pointing up, made it hard to fit in her shoes. She got sent finally to a neurologist at that point. She pounded on the table that she had ALS, as did her grandmother, her mother and her grandfather. And the neurologist, said, "Oh, okay, well, we did the EMG. You got nerve damage in your feet. You got peripheral neuropathy unexplained." This is 2017, right outside New York City. The neurologist did not order genetic testing and did not make any follow-up with her. Just said, "Oh, go get some rehab for your peripheral neuropathy." And to think about it, my mom knew she had ALS at that point. What did I, as her child, what did her family do? Of course, we told her, the doctor said you don't have ALS, Mom. That's a good thing. You're not dying. It's great. Why are you being so neurotic about this? So whatever gaslighting she was receiving from the medical field, we recapitulated as her family. I can't imagine how alone she must have felt in that. She ended up breaking her hip, and the hip surgeon gave her crap for not getting off the walker, accusing her of not doing her exercises. And then her hands started to not work. And so with 2 non-working feet and a hand that didn't work and a voice that started to slur, she finally got diagnosed with ALS, despite the fact that for years she had been going to the medical field for assistance with this. So something's not right there. So let's take a moment and just think about these diseases, about ALS and FTD. And I know there's many smart people on this call, and I know, I know there's many smart people in the FDA, and people know this already. But let's take a moment to really sit with this. So ALS and FTD are progressive neurodegenerative diseases of the brain and central nervous system that result in loss of neurons and atrophy in the motor system or the frontal and temporal regions of the brain, respectively. In some, the symptoms only appear as progressive paralysis or progressive dementia, but often the symptoms and pathology of both phenotypes overlap right from the beginning or as the disease process gets more advanced. So they are progressive neurodegenerative diseases. They get worse over time. It is not one thing that's happening. It is something that is cascading and getting worse and worse over time. As with most neurodegenerative diseases, it is accepted. Everyone could go on mute if you're not on mute. As with most neurodegenerative diseases, it is accepted that the disease process begins well before symptoms that indicate or suggest that clinical diagnosis of ALS or FTD is present. It has been asserted that there's both a preclinical disease period where the disease process is active, but there are no symptoms at all, and a prodromal stage where symptoms are present, but at levels lower than would warrant a full diagnosis. This is not controversial. This is intuitive, and understandings of this existed before any corroborating evidence. But guess what? The field, through hard work of many people that we're very grateful to, and to the families that donated their genetic material to be studied, we've started to find out more about them. So we've found a lot about genetics. So from the earliest recordings of it, there have been families where it has occurred in every generation. Beginning in the 1990s, the genes responsible for the inheritance in these families have been documented. With the discovery of the TARDP mutation, the first genetic link between ALS and FTD was established. With the finding of C9orf72 as the most common genetic cause of ALS and FTD, the closeness of the two diseases was made even more clear. The most common mutated genes responsible for ALS are C9, SOD1, FUS, TARDP. For FTD, the most common are C9, progranulin, and MAPT. Importantly, although we're used to hearing, especially in ALS, about the small percent that are familial or genetic, using the estimated prevalence of these inherited pathogenic genes in ALS and FTD, the annual incidence of ALS and FTD overall, and the average age of onset of the ALS or FTD diagnosis for gene carriers, an approximation of the number of people in the pre-diagnosed community can be calculated. Using this method, we can estimate 142,000 asymptomatic C9 carriers in the US alone. This demonstrates that there are hundreds of thousands of people with these genes in the US alone. So we are many, and we are people that have needs. And what else has happened since these discoveries? Well, our communities have stepped up. So with the discovery of these genes, people at risk in these families have volunteered by the thousands all over the world to be studied, often rather invasively. You can see here a very common thing that is asked of us and that many of us say yes to is spinal taps. Further, there might be full body EMGs, there might be MRIs, there might be cognitive exams, there might be other things that are unpleasant and uncomfortable. But thousands of us do it, and just about all of us who are speaking on this call today do that. You know, I'm involved in, I'm a volunteer subject in ALS FTD, in the ALS Families Project, in the MGH Microbiome Project, in the Neurofilament Surveillance Project study, many studies. What's really sad when you think about it is that despite the fact that in ALS, at least, there's been disease-modifying therapies available since 1995, dozens of us have converted to a full ALS or FTD phenotype while in these studies. So what does that mean? That means that these individuals showed up to medical offices for years, getting seen over and over with the research study documenting their declining physical state without offering the approved drug that treated their disease. Or in the case of FTD, a declining mental state until they finally got a diagnosis. So what has that allowed? So that's allowed detailed info on the biological changes that preceded these conversions. They've been documented and published. But I really think we have to take a moment and realize that those individuals who really sacrificed themselves for science, and we really need to respect the findings that have come from their sacrifice. So despite this, what's the situation for the genetic ALS community today in 2023? There's no care, no prevention, and no intervention. Despite this great expansion in knowledge, our communities rarely receive attempts at care or support, meaning educational, emotional support, especially before symptoms are advanced enough to warrant a full ALS or FTD diagnosis. We are left to fend it for ourselves. There's no prevention or intervention. Outside limited attempts, there have been few attempts to establish interventions that might prevent or delay the onset of symptomatic ALS and FTD, nor whether any possible intervention in these diseases may work differently or better if tried earlier in the disease process. To this point, despite multiple disease-modifying drugs being approved for ALS since 1995, few attempts have been made at determining the best time for people with pathogenic mutations to initiate these therapies to maximize efficacy. Leadership from the FDA could change this dramatically for the better. And just to be clear, we as a community of people at risk for ALS and FTD want to live, and we want to be free of disabilities. Developing symptoms and losing function as the only way to access intervention is barbaric. We like all of our functions. And when you think about it, even if a very effective intervention is found, its impact on a person with a full symptomatic diagnosis is unlikely to match what could be achieved earlier in the disease process. In other diseases, when very effective treatments have been found, people at later disease stages may see a benefit of increased survival, but not the normal lifespans achieved by those treated very early in the disease. We want the best chance at a long life possible. Just to speak very briefly, we can see in the HIV pandemic something that occurred along these lines. Transformative therapies were found in 1995. What did the transformative therapies allow for? For people with symptomatic HIV, otherwise known as AIDS, their life span went from 2 to 10 years. So that was a big jump, but it was just 10 years. For people who are pre-symptomatic HIV positive individuals, their lifespan became basically normal. The genetic ALS community does not want to be in a situation where these very effective treatments are found, and then we have to wait another 5, 10 years to see, oh, can they take them pre-symptomatically? Because in that time, many more people will transition to fully symptomatic and thus have a less effective response. So in preparation for this meeting, we did a survey of our community to see what people thought about pre-symptomatic treatment and their willingness to take risks to get treatment. It was an anonymous online survey. We had 174 eligible responses. We shared our data, presented as an accepted poster at the ALS Allied Professional Forum in November. A journal article is in development. So first big takeaway from this survey was that it is clear our community wants pre-diagnosis treatment. 170 of 174 eligible respondents expressed the desire for treatment before a clinical diagnosis of ALS or FTD would traditionally be made. Most of that group, that big blue section of that pie chart, would take treatment as early as possible without relying on any signs or symptoms. 24% would wait for a biomarker sign of disease, and just a small group, 5%, would wait for prodromal symptoms. So this is just such a clear call that we are not okay with the status quo. Secondly, we are interested in treatments even if they were only trialed in people with an ALS or FTD diagnosis. 165 of 170 eligible respondents expressed an interest in a drug trialed only in symptomatic patients. Most expressed an interest specifically in treatments that were genetically targeted or which had impacts that could be measured. Finally, we are willing to hazard risks for treatments. Presented with 4 efficacy scenarios that you can see here going from left to right, delaying major symptoms by 1, 5, 10 years, or permanently prevented. Respondents were willing to hazard side effects for even the least efficacious scenario and more severe side effects for greater efficacy. So on the left, that's the 1-year delay scenario. The blue and yellow, the blue and red bars are the less severe side effects. Blue is temporary, the red is lifelong. And a majority of respondents, even for 1 year prevention of major symptoms, would be willing to accept those less severe side effects. If you go over to the right, that's a treatment that would hypothetically permanently prevent symptoms. People were willing, a majority, to accept severe symptoms, both temporary and severe and lifelong combined. People were willing to accept that for a very efficacious treatment. So we are the people who should be making these risk-benefit calculations for ourselves, and nobody else should be making these decisions for us. Before we move into our personal stories, I did want to take a moment to check in on our attendees. We have 48 people or so on the Google Meet. So whoever's on the live stream right now, we have space in the Google meeting. If you'd like to go to your email and click on the Google Meet link, you're welcome in it. I think the quality will be better, and you'll be able to participate in the Q&A at the end. So just wanted to do that bit of housekeeping. So from here, we're going to go into some powerful personal stories.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time in your evening to join us tonight. My name is Mindy Erlob, and I lost my grandfather in 1969 to C9orf72 ALS. I lost my mother 3 years ago this month to C9 ALS, and I am a carrier of the C9orf72 mutation. If you look at the pictures below, those handsome young men there, that's my husband next to me, who will be responsible for taking care of me when I develop symptoms. And my 2 sons are also pictured. They are at risk of developing C9 ALS FTD. The picture to the right is me with my mom. When my mom was alive, she was 5'8", and it's the only time I've ever been taller than her because she's in a wheelchair. And above is the picture of my mom's dad, Milton, who died before I was born. Next slide, please. I have enrolled in more than a dozen longitudinal studies, including Mass General's Dials Clinic at Harvard, UCSF's All FTD program, the Columbia ALS Families Project, the Bluefield Neurofilament Program, the NIH's NINDS Neurodegenerative Disorders and ALS FTD study, and I'm a participant in the Everything ALS speech study. Currently, I guess I do have some silver lining, which is that I'm being screened for the very first ever attempt to see what a drug could do pre-symptomatically in a C9 carrier. I've had to advocate for myself at every single study that I'm part of to partake in these kinds of clinical trials. But sadly, it's a very small phase 2 study. It's only recruiting 2 pre-symptomatic gene carriers. And they're sort of incentivized to include us, but I don't know. I think that it would be a lot more important and impactful if I were actually part of a stage 3 trial. Not to mention that, nobody really considers me an ALS patient, even though I go through all of the same medical tests that all ALS patients go through. I have donated spinal fluid, blood, skin samples, time. I've been, MRI'd and poked and prodded in all kinds of ways, and I will never see the result of these tests because I'm not included in any of the clinical trials. Next slide, please. I will continue to advocate for clinical trials for pre-symptomatic ALS patients because no child should have to watch their parent die of ALS FTD. My mom had to watch her father die and struggle for years with ALS before I was born. She was only in her 20s when she lost him, and it was very hard for her to have to go through that when she was so young. 5 years ago, she had to go through ALS again. It took her about 2 years of having symptoms to be diagnosed. And by then she was too late. It was too late for her to participate in any clinical trials. I had to watch her struggle, and my brother had to watch her struggle, and my kids had to watch her lose her ability to walk and speak and breathe. And they'll remember their grandma, their nanny, choking on her food, tripping and falling and crying in frustration before she died. It's not fair that after enduring generations of ALS, my sons will watch as I will also weaken and die of this disease someday. I already know that ALS is coming for me, and I feel like I'm standing on a beach in a valley when a tsunami is coming. The only way for me to reach higher ground is through science, and I need to be included in clinical trials before I start to show symptoms of ALS. It's the only way to guarantee that my kids won't have to go through the trauma of familial ALS again. I am the author of a forthcoming book called A War of Nerves. It's an ALS memoir, which chronicles my journey of giving myself up as a specimen to find a cure for ALS. Thank you for your attention, and I will now pass this over to Wanda.
Thank you. My name is Wanda Smith, and thank you to the members of the FDA. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you to share my story of pain and my request that each of you individually and collectively will advance treatments for us. My family live and die with what we refer to as it. My grandmother had it. She's in the top left. Life magazine published an expose of me caregiving for my mom in February of 1986. That's one of the photo images on the bottom left. She had it. She was 52. I was 28 at the time. I had 3 in diapers, my infant, my toddler, and my mom. But the article brought a national spotlight to Alzheimer's disease. In the top right, you'll see the 5-generation pedigree chart. Took over 40 years to develop. My family, we participated across 7 research centers, donating over 350 samples of plasma and over 40 brains. Disinhibition, aphasia, memory loss, and tremors are symptoms of the IT. In 2006, our IT was finally given a name, the cascading malfunction of the protein progranulin. It affects my family members as young as 40 and as old as 90, we think. 26 are confirmed progranulin, and an estimated 53 have had it. Our symptoms vary, our conversion rates vary, progression of the disease varies. There are wobblers. As they get better, they get worse, and they finally spiral downward. Next, please. In April of 2006, my sister enrolled in the first clinical trial for progranulin. It was like a scene from the movie Awakenings. She stopped repeating her stories and she could find her way to the hotel, even hotel room 637. She was back. The trial didn't meet the endpoints. It was closed. It failed. So she tried a second clinical trial. She couldn't pass the cognitive test. One more little box she would have passed. We all cried, feeling hopelessly. The clock was ticking. Could we get her into another study? What trials are even out there? Who do we call? Will we spend so much effort and she still not be able to qualify? Will the confusion of travel cause her to decline even more quickly? Well, we found another trial, and much to our shock, she passed. Unfortunately, COVID was in full swing, and her spouse became concerned about the travel, the immunosuppressants that she would receive. And we were confused and concerned about the shedding of the AAV viral vector load. We did all we could to save her. She died 3 weeks ago. She lived with the disease over 9.5 years. Her quality of life and the length of her life may have well been extended because of the clinical trial that each of you at the FDA approved and that she participated in. So I'd really like to thank you. My brother currently has progranulin and is ineligible due to cardiac issues. We're looking into trials currently, knowing that he may not pass the cognitive test as he's losing speech quickly. Next slide, please. Clinical trials seem to be organized into 3 distinct buckets: Alzheimer's disease, red bucket for memory; FTD, yellow bucket for behaviors; and ALS, a blue bucket for motor movement. If we stick to these rigid buckets, we will miss the overlapping tapestry of colors and the common biomarkers across the neurodegenerative processes and diseases. There's extraordinary drug development interest in strategies to treat ALS, FTD, granulin. We want as many promising approaches as possible tested in symptomatic and family members so they can benefit from the ones that work the best. We need FDA. We need an innovative approach. Trials in the ALS, FTD, granulin are challenging because family members present with different syndromes, the symptoms change, and they evolve as the disease progresses. Measuring cognition is challenging. Wouldn't molecular change make better sense to measure? Could it be that the way we're looking at the endpoints are so noisy that we're really missing real solutions? Families describe these quirky psychiatric-like symptoms they're seeing in their loved ones, even while the MRI shows normal, a normal brain. Just think of that. Families are seeing the behaviors, yet the MRI shows normal, but the genetic panel will show a disease risk and the biomarker shows change. We need the FDA to create multi-arm platform approaches. Yes, you, FDA, we really need you. We need you to exercise some regulatory flexibility and to support clinical trial designs that include smaller clinical trials. We need you, the FDA, to accelerate the approvals based on the Subpart H using biomarkers that are likely to predict a clinical benefit. Yes, and FDA, we need you to approve pre-symptomatic and prodromal ALS FTD trials for those who may not have any measurable symptoms, but may have molecular change. Multi-arm platform, flexible, smaller, quicker approvals, fluid biomarkers. That's what we would like. Next, please. And FDA, yes, we need you to follow your own example. As in cancer, where accelerated approvals is more common and it facilitates approvals based on surrogate biomarkers. FTD, ALS are deadly diseases. And once our loved ones become symptomatic, the outcome is fatal. By the time the symptoms appear, the disease is well on its way. So will you, FDA, will you help us get ahead of it? We need you now to help our families. Thank you very much. Let me introduce you to Bonnie, our next speaker. Bonnie.
Thank you, Wanda. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today. Each of us here have unique stories, just like each of you. We have childhood memories and crazy teenage years and exciting years of going to college and spreading our wings. One thing different about our stories is the plague of ALS and FTD that has ravaged our families. I grew up on a horse farm in Virginia. We had horses, chickens, cats, dogs, and even a goat named Thurman. I loved to ride my horses bareback down to the river on a hot summer day and take a swim. I went to Meredith College in Raleigh, North Carolina for interior design and went on to get my master's degree in special education. In 2012, I married the love of my life, and we have two beautiful girls. They are now 6 and 8. In this image, this is a picture of my father about a month before he passed away with my two girls. My dad was a gene carrier. I am a gene carrier. My girls both have a 50% chance of being a gene carrier as well. I have a TAR-DBP or TAR-DBP genetic mutation. It causes both ALS and FTD. In 2016, my dad began having bulbar symptoms. After months of searching and constant doctor's appointments, including 2 visits to a world-renowned ALS doctor, my dad's symptoms had progressed far enough to finally get an ALS diagnosis in 2017. Months were lost. So many doctors were seen for the doctors to finally give him the diagnosis that we had thought it was all along. We found out months later that our worst nightmare was our reality. It was genetic. My grandmother died with FTD. My great-grandmother, 2 of my grandmother's brothers, and several cousins all passed from ALS. Upon my dad's diagnosis, my family quickly jumped into the fight for my dad's life. We searched for treatments and drug trials and came up empty-handed. He participated in Answer ALS, and he eventually donated his brain. I joined Dials and All FTD in hopes that contributing in somewhat small way would help. I couldn't sit by and just watch my dad die just a little bit every day. But still, 13 months later, he passed away. Jean, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. As part of the studies that I'm involved in, I have lumbar punctures, blood drawn, urine collected, strength measured, MRI scans. Some are done annually and some are done biannually. I do all of this in hopes that one day this data will help someone. Maybe it'll even help my babies. C9 and SOD1 are seen much more frequently than TAR-DBP. TAR-DBP is unique though. It has the same pathology as 97% of ALS cases. The accumulation of TDP-43 aggregates in the central nervous system is a common feature of many neurodegenerative diseases such as ALS and FTD. The following drugs are currently available: Risual, Nuedexta, Deveron, and access is given to these drugs once you receive a diagnosis, and receiving that diagnosis is such a lengthy process. Companies should consider carrying out studies of these drugs on pre-symptomatic carriers to determine the effects. Could it be that the earlier a person receives treatment, the slower the progression? But without a clinical study, we will never know. The following drugs are currently in trial: Stathmin-2, Ataxin-2, and N-of-1 ASOs. Pre-symptomatic gene carriers should be included in these trials as well. We need to get a better understanding of how it could affect someone that is not yet showing visible symptoms of the disease. It could possibly be affecting their cellular level. Prevention is so much better than treatment. If we could go to the next slide. I am here today asking you, begging you, pleading you, FDA, for drugs like Deveron, Risual, ASOs like Ataxin-2, Stathmin-2, N-of-1 studies. We're in a place where custom treatments are happening now. Treatments are coming. I truly believe that. TAR-DBP has the same pathology as 97% of sporadic ALS. And by granting access to drugs that are currently available and drugs coming down the pipeline, imagine the lives that you could change, improve, and lengthen. Currently, the only options is a pre-symptomatic gene carrier or vitamins, dietary changes, and avoiding environmental toxins. Recently, I began having vesiculations. I removed foods that cause me inflammation, such as gluten, eggs, soy, nightshades, legumes, processed foods, sugar, caffeine, alcohol, pretty much all the good stuff. I stay away from lakes and ponds that have cyanobacteria. I added a whole house water purification system and a whole house air purification system. I take anywhere from 10 to 15 vitamins a day. I'm followed by a functional medicine doctor that advises me and looks at my blood work to make sure my vitamin levels are within a normal range. The ALS studies that I'm involved in give me no feedback. I have no idea whether the changes I have made have positively or negatively affected my biomarkers. Have my biomarkers ever changed? I have no idea. The doctors I see through these studies that I am a part of are absolutely lovely, though. I would not change our relationship for the world, but their job is to collect data. I'm so grateful that these doctors want to study me and collect that data. Thank you so much to these doctors. I pray that by adding pre-symptomatic carriers as participants to clinical trials, we will have positive impacts seen by generations to come, that another generation will not have to suffer the same fate as so many people already have. Thank you so much for meeting with us today and listening to each one of our stories. We all know how precious time is. Thank you again. Now I'd like to introduce you to Nicole.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you for taking the time to be with us and listen and learn. And my sincere hope is that it moves you to help save our families. My name is Nicole. I am a caregiver. I've been married for 25 years, and I consider myself now a widow in waiting. My mother-in-law is pictured on the right with her daughter. She was diagnosed of a variation of ALS in her 60s in 2002. That was 11 years prior to the C9 gene being known to be hereditary. For 2 years, she had early symptoms of dementia, and she was clear it was not Alzheimer's. She used to say it's an exotic disease. And then she started to lose her balance and started choking on everything. She finally was diagnosed with bulbar onset and passed 9 months post-diagnosis. She has 3 biological children, her daughter in the picture, and my husband with me in the picture below, and another son. My husband is the only one who has been tested, and the other 2 have decided to not to because there is no cure. My husband was diagnosed age 64 in November 2021 with behavioral variant FTD, ALS. 2 years early symptoms of FTD and extreme muscle loss. The ALS is slow moving. The FTD is not. We have 2 biological children pictured below. And those 2, 19 and 22, don't want to be tested or know why, or know that they have the gene. We have 11 descendants that have a 50-50 chance of being C9 positive with a brand new baby along the way. Next slide, please. So I watched my mother-in-law rapidly deteriorate and die from this awful disease, but never in a million years would I have thought it would be coming to claim my husband's life and possibly the lives of our children, my nieces, and their babies. Someone once said to me that, you know, each disease on its own, FTD or ALS, it's devastating, but having both together is a special kind of torture. They're not lying. And it has had devastating impacts on all aspects of our lives, leading up to an after diagnosis, which is a complete death sentence. So prior to diagnosis of my husband, we started to see some behavioral changes that on their own might give pause, but adding them up became very concerning. And I found myself like checking back, but like, did I just hear that right? Is this, you know, or what I saw, was that right? He had lack of insight, lack of empathy. Our kids were getting ADHD assessments. They were done 6 months apart. The feedback from the assessor was like, hey, everybody, you know, looked at your children the same way and was pretty close. But your husband's, it was like he was looking at a completely different child. She wondered and thought maybe that's pretty curious. During a dinner with my son's previous girlfriend, her entire family sitting there, he says, hey, you're a control freak, and gets up and leaves and doesn't even understand it was wrong or and showed no remorse. So there's that lack of insight and empathy, poor judgment. He started missing paying his business taxes 2 years in a row, which was completely unlike him, making very bad decisions that could have put us in legal trouble. He paid $26,000 in psychic services so that our relationship could be healed, giving out our home address to scammers and having them send pictures of our house back to them. Having him tell me, hey, I don't want to tell you, but we're going to be millionaires, and not even remember saying it to me. He purchased my son's car via Venmo. Paperwork wasn't even correctly spelling my son's name. It's just all over the board. And trying to, like any one of those, all of them, horrific. So we thought maybe, does he have depression? He would say, you know, to the doctor says I'm not depressed. I just need more exercise. I got to the point where I had to threaten to divorce him because he wasn't taking his health seriously. He finally got an MRI, which showed his hippocampus in the 1 percentile for his age group. But what he heard back from the doctor was, hey, it's not really a big deal. You must have just had a concussion at some point. Nothing to worry about. So I've learned now that everything fine is part of the FTD diagnosis. And I never say the word right, the anagnosia, but everything is always fine for him, but for our lives, it's not. He first was then diagnosed with mild cognitive decline, started to lose more muscle weight, getting the fasciculations, and the muscle test came back saying he didn't have ALS. And our first neurologist just said, early Alzheimer's, it's, you know, here's some drugs, and refused to dig further into the type of dementia, or referring us to an ALS neurologist that we begged her to do because we knew of my mother-in-law. I was finally able to convince his primary to get a referral. We were in with the Swedish ALS clinic, who first test says we're going to do some genetic testing. You're with me until we figure out what this is going to, what the diagnosis is. 2 weeks after, we found out that he was C9 positive. It was a relief and a nightmare at the same time. So post-diagnosis, I live with someone who acts at the age of 5, is losing a piece of himself and his freedom every single day, but thinks everything is fine. And I guess that's better for him, that he doesn't really fully understand what's ahead. Most importantly, he loses the right as he goes through this to end his life with dignity. But it's a complete living hell for all of us. The disease has impacted every part of our lives: financial, physical health, work, friendships, mental health, trying to live while grieving. So I know I can't change the trajectory of the disease for my husband, and I'm doing everything that I can to give him the best rest of life that he can have. But the impact that absolutely tears at my heart and soul is that on my family, my nieces, and our children. Our kids have to, live with the fact of not only losing their dad at a young age, but live in fear of actually catching the disease, where there's no cure, no treatments to delay or stop them from getting it. There's little to no resources or support to help them navigate. And one family member has even shared that they would choose to end their life if they knew that they carried the gene. This has broken me in ways that I can't even explain. So my ask for each of you is to really sit back and think about, what if this was happening to you? What if it was happening to your parent, your partner, your spouse, your child? What if your child was living in fear and a family member wanted to die if they had the gene? What actions would you do to save that person? We have nothing to lose, yet a life to gain by getting early access to treatments that could delay or stop the onset and increase survival and of our family members and all these people here to live a normal life, not one out of fear, but one out of hope. So my ask, I'm begging you for hope. I'm going to turn this over now to Deborah. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ro Kumar, and I'm Deborah's husband. Deborah is seated next to me. I will be reading out a prepared statement written by Deborah. She's unable to speak because of her bulbar ALS condition. We do have a few slides in here, but I'll stick to her prepared statement. So here goes. My name is Deborah Kumar, and I'm a mother of 3 children, and I have bulbar onset ALS. I have lost most of my ability to speak. Sorry. And I now use a speech assistant app. I have lost my grandfather, father, uncle, and brother to ALS. I have known I was a C9 gene carrier since early 2020. During 2021, I experienced notable changes in my voice, particularly pitch, which is an early bulbar symptom, as well as periodic slurred speech. As a C9 gene carrier, I was being followed by doctors at Mass General Hospital in Boston for an observation study and a neurologist at Swedish Hospital in Seattle. One doctor suggested I had acid reflux when I reported my symptoms and concerns, and I was put on an over-the-counter medication. But my speech continued to deteriorate. I was diagnosed with bulbar dysfunction in April 2022. All of the ALS doctors I've been working with are aware the disease process can begin long before symptoms manifest. My neurologist told me as such. As I mentioned, I was showing symptoms in 2021, a full year before my diagnosis. I was prodromal, but the LS Scorial standard is such that I had to wait until I reached clinical manifestation to get a diagnosis that would allow me access to investigative medications and clinical trials. I had to get sicker, and yes, to a point of no return, to get the help I needed. I cannot let this happen to one or more of my children. My children live in fear of potentially carrying the C9 gene and knowing there is no cure for ALS at this time. They already think of life choices. My children watched as I cared for my dying father, followed by my dying brother, and now they are watching my husband care for me. The time for change is now, as the data is clear. We need treatment earlier in the ALS timeline before clinical manifestation begins. I wonder what my speech would be today had I been presented with Riluzole and Radicava just 2 years ago. I implore you to act now before another generation is needlessly lost to familial ALS FTD. Thank you. Back to Jean.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers and to everyone for sticking in for a hard presentation that is hard to hear about and is hard for us to live with. So here's our summary. The genetic ALS and FTD community does not want to be forgotten. The biomarker and clinical learnings from those of us who have sacrificed ourselves to be observed as we decline and convert to a full ALS or FTD diagnosis need to be used as endpoints by the FDA in evaluating therapies for ALS and FTD. We cannot let the sacrifices and lack of intervention offered to people like Deborah go unused. When effective treatments are discovered, the pre-symptomatic community must be included in indications. Regarding the already approved therapies for ALS, we must determine the best time for people with pathogenic mutations to initiate these therapies to maximize efficacy. We should not leave any stone unturned in trying to cure or prevent these horrendous diseases. We should not ignore testing interventions at all disease stages. Given the emotional and physical burdens of this situation and the availability of disease-modifying agents, the time has come to recognize the plight of the pre-symptomatic genetic carriers if we are to be an equitable and humane society. So this concluded our presentation to the FDA. At this point, we transitioned into our Q&A with the FDA staff. And here we are going to offer a brief recounting of that. Julie is going to host it. And so I'll give it over to Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Granning, and I am another pre-symptomatic ALS SOD1 gene carrier. And these will be our initial recountings. An FDA-approved written summary will be available in the coming weeks. What I have is, oops, line up here. So our question and answer session began, well, first let me tell you, we had 54 participants in the FDA listening session, including some, let's see, we had the hosts were, we had the FDA director, Brendan O'Leary. We had Billy Dunn from the FDA. We had the FDA director, Christine Mueller. We had a deputy director, let's see, Kyungwon Hong. We had the chief medical officer, Lei Su, and many, many more in our session. So let's see, we had some question answer session, and it began with Teresa Buracchio. She said, "Thank you for your presentation. I did have one question. You raised the drug that was approved in 1995. I believe it's called Riluzole. Is that not offered to you when you find out you have the mutation? The other drug, the IV one, I can see the IV being a complication, but for the earlier one, I assume it's being used." And Jean was the first to answer this question.
Yeah, so here was my response. So quite the opposite, actually. No, we are not offered these drugs when we find out we have these mutations. In fact, at the most recent ALS M&D symposium, two genetic ALS experts, great people and great experts, Drs. Amar Chalabi and Dr. Michael Benatar, talked about it in a Q&A, and it was clear it was like a novel concept to both of them, 27 years after the drug's approval. And it's just so strange that this has not been contemplated before now. And certainly people are not being offered it right now. So that was what I had said to them.
Teresa responded, to our recollection, well, I just want to be clear that from the FDA's perspective, the pre-symptomatic stage in genetic mutation carriers is part of the ALS disease process. They would appropriately be in clinical trials for ALS. And then Mindy had a comment.
My comment was that I was never offered riluzole, but my wonderful neurologist has agreed to put me on it. So I will be going on that pretty soon.
There was a question in the chat read by Sean. Did you ask in the survey about drugs or about genetic therapy, just one or the other? Jean?
I answered that we talked about theoretical interventions. We didn't really differentiate between gene therapies or other drugs.
Okay. Another question via the chat. Has your pre-manifest community had an opportunity to connect with industry about what's important to you?
I answered that we've had great conversations and a lot of dialogue with companies with genetic targets in their portfolio. We do think that, genetic ALS patients receive all the treatments for ALS or FTD. So we would hope to have good interface with all of the Hall field, but really it's been most from the people with genetic drugs in late stage trials.
Another question via the chat. What is a clinically meaningful endpoint for pre-symptomatic populations?
So this one got funny a little bit because I immediately said, well, the only clinical endpoint for pre-symptomatic that we want is not developing symptoms. So that is the only one that aligns with what we are looking at. And I think I said we like biological changes, I think at that point, but I think Tucker then had some things to say, or Julie, I forget.
Yeah, I had chimed in saying that though having the genetic mutation isn't necessarily considered a clinical endpoint to me and to many others, that itself should be the baseline or the litmus test for obtaining treatment. Consenting adults should, if they have the mutation and get in for a highly penetrant terminal disease, if they want to start receiving treatment now, that should be their option and not someone else's decision to make.
And then I think was there anyone else, Julie, in that?
No, it was back to you. You went a bit more about biological changes.
Yeah, so I did want to bring up that we can do prodromal trials in ALS, and we are not doing prodromal trials. And I went to great pains to make sure that I was able to share that we are not asking for prodromal trials. We really think that biomarker trials are what we want. But if you did want to do a prodromal trial, you could find people who are in the prodrome, which you will find if we are going to see doctors. You could then put people on placebo-controlled trials during the prodrome, and then you could measure the time to a full diagnosis between those on the drug and those on placebo. The placebo would end at full diagnosis, and then you could see still, even after diagnosis, the rate of decline between the people who got the earlier start and the people who got the drug. So, but I made pains to say, we're not really, that's not our dream, is to have prodromal trials. our dream is biological marker trials.
Then I interjected myself to comment again on Teresa's question. If you asked if pre-symptomatic treatments are discussed or available to us. We are so far from being offered even pre-symptomatic monitoring, much less treatment. It's incredible. I found a neurologist who, after testing, was willing to monitor me, and that is incredibly rare. I did want to make the point because, to me, she's like, aren't we getting treatments? And to me, I thought, well, we're not even getting monitoring or believed at all or talked to or yeah, geez. So Tucker then joined in.
You might have to.
All right, Tucker commented, another issue is lack of genetic protections and how little Gina actually does for our community.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there is hesitation and sort of kind of piggybacking in relation to the first question I asked about Riluzole, is that I think many people in the pre-symptomatic stage only see neurologists through clinical studies and not having a clinical neurologist. So not only can they not obtain a treatment prescribed through a study because it doesn't exist, but there's this confounding issue of many people who are afraid to see clinical neurologists due to quite frankly some genetic discrimination that I myself have seen on life insurance questionnaires from employers saying, have you ever sought advice about ALS? Yeah, so it's an issue.
And then Jean had a further comment, but Jean, maybe a quick what GINA is for people watching this re-presentation. But
yeah. Go ahead, Tucker.
Oh, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. It was an act that was it early 2000s or late 90s when it was passed, and at the time it was cheered, but the amount or the lack thereof of actual protections that it provides is insufficient compared to what other countries have been able to accomplish.
I think I then shared that lots of people have chronic illnesses that may impact their ability to get insurances, and people figure it out. So that shouldn't be a roadblock in getting care. And I think I also then shared that our ally and supporter and mentor, Dr. Terry Hyman Patterson, is working on a conference to establish care guidelines for people in our community in consultation with us and other experts like Dr. Michael Benatar. So I think I shared that then. Okay.
Another question read out by Teresa. What's it like when you try to get care after you test positive for the mutation? I assume you see a neurologist after that. Where do you go to get evaluation and care? Mindy?
I can't remember what I said, but my guess is that once I got my my test back, I was sort of left twisting in the wind. I mean, I literally I had no idea where to go. And I went to the internet and I found our wonderful friend, Daniel Barvin, who connected me with I Am ALS. And it took many weeks for me to even realize that there were clinical trials out there for people who had ALS and no clinical trials for people who were pre-symptomatic. I didn't realize when I got my diagnosis, I felt so alone. I literally felt so alone. And it was compounded by the fact that my mother was dying. And so, I mean, I feel incredibly blessed to have this community, but I had no, I was high in America, I guess is what we say. I had no idea where to go. And I think a lot of people who get their genetic test back have no clue where to go. And so we have to sort of do this for each other. Is that what I said? I hope.
Yeah,
I hope.
you said you picked a random neurologist at Stanford and commented on the process that you'd have to pay thousands to get the test. And he told you to make sure you had life and long-term care insurance before you got it.
Right.
And that you didn't even know where to begin. And that going through a study is best, and it's not on your insurance.
Right.
I believe the next answer came from Wanda.
Yeah, I think the question that was posed was how easy or difficult is it to get a diagnosis? And I related with progranulin, 2 family members. One of them was having difficulty at work. We couldn't get into the ALS quick enough because the appointment sometimes can take 4 to 6 to 8 months out. And so we needed to have a neurologist who would give the disability documentation to go along with the diagnosis. And fortunately, because people have been very good to me, I was able to fly him in and get a diagnosis much quicker. The other family member went to her local doctor and went through the process, and we're raising money now to pay for her $2,500 genetic test, but it took her 4 to 6 months. And that's only because she told the GP and all of the other doctors that she saw that she was progranulin, and she knew she was progranulin. But even getting that diagnosis took many, many months. She's now in a clinical trial, so we're very happy that she's been able to move forward.
And then
Julie, can I piggyback on that real quick? I know I didn't say this last week, but to just stress the hurdle that we still face just to even get a diagnosis. The most recent member in my family to have developed and passed away to ALS, my Aunt Patty, she originally went to a neurologist here in Fort Wayne, and the neurologist told her that they didn't think she has ALS. She knew that she had it. She watched her siblings and her mother die of it. And so she had to go down months later to the neurologist that my dad saw in Indianapolis, who immediately was able to recognize that that's ALS, and she died 10 months later, which I mean is that gap alone is it's very significant, especially had she been able to obtain any treatment. I mean that's a large time to go without getting any support at all, and no diagnosis. It's terrible.
Julie, I think you were next.
Actually, I do think you were in there, Jean.
I think I already said the part I said. Yep. I think at this point I mentioned Carrie's conference. So anyway.
Yeah, you said it's rare for us to be seen by a neurologist until we're disabled enough to get an ALS or FTD diagnosis. So, and yeah, like Tucker said, we all have these same experiences. Oh, we had a question via the chat. Is your community willing to participate in trials that are placebo controlled? And Jean.
Oh yeah, I said our survey was clear. The answers to would you take a hypothetical treatment or would you participate in a clinical trial? It was like the same. Vast majority said yes, we are willing to do it.
Yes. And then we did get a post-meeting question relayed by an email from the patient affairs team. Have any members of the patient community had experience using technologies with wellness features or wearable products with wellness features like smartwatches to provide clinicians with insight in their day-to-day experiences and routines? For example, iPhones have a wellness walking steadiness feature.
And I answered.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just answered that, yeah, they're cool, but we bring them up with the studies, and the studies don't, like DIALS and ALS FTD specifically, don't want to use the Apple products because they don't see all the data and they don't know the algorithm or whatever that created the feature. So that was all I shared. And then Mindy, please feel free.
The studies, a lot of the studies actually do have wearable devices. I've participated in 3 or 4 of them. So, I actually you can use your phone as a wearable device for some of the studies, and you can actually wear like a little wrist thing. So yes.
I just wanted to quickly share, since it wasn't in the FDA thing, but like Tucker, I had a unique experience that I feel like should be more what we should be experiencing. I found out there was a genetic link in the family. I had called the ALSA. She pointed me to a genetic counselor and a neurologist team together. I spoke with her. They got they had me get my insurance in order. They gave me testing through insurance. But then that same day I found out the positive diagnosis, the neurologist did a baseline EMG, and basically I'm in touch with him. And if I have fasciculations or any worries or concerns, I'm to go in and get monitoring. And that is so incredibly rare. And it's not what we're receiving.
So I do want to leave some time for Q&A with the audience, but I did just need to highlight for a second some of this that we just heard from the FDA. The a lead neurology director at the FDA said that we should have access to FDA-approved drugs for ALS, and that we are part of the ALS disease process. This implies that any indication for a drug treating ALS, we are covered under. And this is a big deal. And we are very excited about it. Now, some things about this. So one, pivotal trials in ALS. This is just some initial thoughts from us on this. Pivotal trials for ALS drugs that have already had some safety documentation. We should be in those trials, much like the progranulin elector trial for AL001. I think the bulk of the participants are people diagnosed with progranulin FTD, but they have a cohort of pre-symptomatic progranulin carriers where they're looking for molecular changes. So I think every ALS trial should be like that. Two, we should no longer be in the situation where our symptoms are being measured on some, balance of like, well, is it advanced enough yet? No, you need to get worse. That should be out the door right now. If people have any level of symptoms, then people should begin receiving the medications. One thing that we do think there perhaps needs to be some more discussion on and analysis of is the concept of prophylactic treatment, which clearly the FDA felt that prophylactic treatment with riluzole was perfectly acceptable. So I do think that with some reasoned analysis of experts, consulting with the community, we should come up with some guidelines for prophylactic use of these drugs. But anyway, it's a big deal. So just wanted to get that initial feedback out there. Julie, I don't know if you had anything else. Otherwise, we'll open up for any questions from the group.
I don't, but I was going to do a very fast read of the chat. Thank you all for sharing your stories. Bless you all. Thank you for sharing, everyone. You're speaking for so many of us, and I can't express how much I appreciate it. Thank you all for sharing. Great job. Thank you much for sharing your stories and for the valuable information you brought to the FDA and shared so effectively with them and us. This should be required viewing for every neurology resident. Have you had conversations with MT Pharma and Amylyx about trialing their products? Atlas uses iPhone and watch for a monthly test, but not daily wear. Atlas being a SOD1 pre-symptomatic drug trial for tofersen. And Tucker commented, when IMALS had a video conference with Amylyx, I asked about the pre-symptomatic population. They had not explored the topic, nor had any current plans to do so. This was around a year ago. And then MC is right on. All right. Jean, here you go.
I see Ron had a hand up. Ron, do you want to ask your question? I guess that mistake.
Sorry, yes, it was a mistake. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I just wanted to say thank you. It was a great presentation, and I appreciate everything that everybody is doing. Thank you.
Oh, great. A happy mistake then, because I liked hearing that from you. Thank you. If anyone else has any questions or comments, feel free. Howard, feel free.
So, Gene, one of your comments to the FDA was that they asked you, or if I remember correctly, they asked you were there any these trials for pre-symptomatic people? Or they asked you, or the statement was made that that we should be included? Was there any response back from the FDA yet on any of this
No,
stuff?
the FDA said in the response to us that we should be in clinical trials. They said that in ALS clinical trials. They said.
What I'm saying, but how much weight does that carry with actually getting something done?
Well, we got to hustle with the pharmaceutical companies and with the genetic ALS experts and the conference that Terry's doing. So there's work ahead of us for sure. But I think this information from the FDA is nothing but good news for us, I think. And all the better when it's in writing. But we wanted to share this initial verbal recounting first. I think Karen has a hand up.
Yeah, this is Jim Halpert. I'm Karen's husband, and I have C9 and am in my first year of diagnosis with ALS. But I wanted to offer to help you because I'm a privacy lawyer, and it's very likely that Congress is going to consider seriously a new privacy law this year, and any amendments to the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act. This is totally in the interest of everybody who has C9, might be able to pass this year. So I'm happy to work with Tucker or anyone else on that, as well as to share other information about treatments that Richard Bedlock has posted. There are a bunch that are not approved as pharma drugs, but seem to be effective and particularly early on, so maybe well worth considering, like methylcobalate injections. Thanks.
Jim, if we could possibly connect offline or after this, or later this week, I'd love to chat.
That's great. I actually work in the White House, so it's easy for me to pass along some ideas on this, and we'd be happy to work with you.
Great.
That makes me so happy. Thank you. It is the reason my children and the rest of my family don't want to, be tested. So it's fear of what it means to them and their future, right?
Absolutely. It's bad for their health.
No, it's right on.
Thank you.
This is a popular idea, and wonderfully, your wife Karen has been in great contact with us. So I know we'll be tight friends and get to work on this stuff. I did want to give Brandon a chance to ask a question with the little time we have.
Hi. So it's good that the FDA says that pre-symptomatic carriers should be in trials, but the problem with that is that it can take a very long time to actually see results. Are drug companies going to be interested in this? And will the FDA accept biomarkers as evidence of efficacy?
Yeah, no, I think this is a very delicate thing. I think what likely is to happen is there's going to be trials like the Elector one, where there's a small cohort of pre-symptomatic people where really the end result is going to be the biological change. And the FDA may not approve the trial with that as the primary endpoint. But the primary endpoint will be the clinical change in the symptomatic people. But the information that comes from the cohort will be considered by the FDA. And I'm not an expert on any of this, but I do know the AL001 trial has this cohort of pre-symptomatic people. So I think that's what it's going to end up looking like. But I don't have a crystal ball, and we'll see. I see there's a question about the National Society of Genetic Counselors. We're just coming up on 90 minutes. I want to respect people's time. I just wanted to make sure that we had our contact info up for folks. We have an email address. We are on Twitter. It's been wonderful speaking with you all today. I know there's many more things for us to talk about. Feel free to take it offline with us. We are nothing if not an open book. And I really, really appreciate all of you. With that, I will say, let's end for tonight. Thank you so much, everyone. Our movement is still has a lot of work that we got to be doing, and I think there's so much for us to do. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.